The room froze when the man threw water in her face. Gasps echoed through the dining hall. Silverware clattered to a stop. Wine glasses trembled in stunned hands. The waitress stood there, soaked, humiliated, her uniform clinging to her like a second skin. But what no one expected was what she did next. This wasn't just a waitress, this was her restaurant. And the man who'd just insulted her? He had no idea he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Let's go back to where it began. The Grand Mare was the kind of place people whispered about before payday. An elite, five-star dining hall that sat at the top of Everly Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Marble floors, velvet curtains, and chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. Every inch of the place screamed elegance. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was an experience. The kind of spot where people proposed, sealed business deals, or brought their in-laws to impress them. The kind of place that had a waiting list months long, and where the water was served with lemon curls and fresh mint. And the mastermind behind it all? Elena Monroe. A brilliant, poised woman in her late 30s, Elena wasn't born into wealth. She earned every inch of the Grand Mare's marble. A self-made restaurateur who had clawed her way to success with grit, brilliance, and kindness. Her staff adored her. Her regulars respected her, and her business partners feared her for the right reasons. But perfection is hard to maintain. Lately, something had begun to rot beneath the surface. Elena had started receiving quiet complaints from her staff. At first, they were small, a rude comment here, a belittling tone there. But then came a pattern. Certain customers, usually wealthy, entitled ones, were making racist or classist remarks. Some barked orders. Others snapped fingers. A few mocked accents. Elena's management team tried to handle it, but the truth was hard to catch unless you saw it with your own eyes. So she made a decision. She would go undercover. On a cool Friday evening, Elena left her pearl earrings at home. She tied her hair into a neat bun, swapped her power suit for a brown apron, and stepped into the Grand Mare through the back entrance, not as the boss, but as a new waitress. Only two people knew who she really was. The head chef, Marcus, and longtime guests, the Martins, who were sworn to secrecy. The restaurant pulsed with energy that night. Soft jazz floated through the air, mixing with the warm scent of rosemary. Lamb and roasted garlic. Waiters glided between tables with trained precision. Elena moved among them, invisible. She carried trays, took orders, wiped glasses, smiled until her cheeks ached. And all the while, she watched. She listened. She learned. That's when he arrived. The heavy glass doors swung open with a gust of cold air. In stepped a man who seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. Thomas Bellamy, a known name in real estate. Expensive suit, designer watch, sunglasses worn indoors, and an ego that preceded him by 3 feet. Behind him trailed a young assistant, thin and nervous, gripping a sleek laptop case like a shield. The hostess greeted them with a bright smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Mare." Bellamy barely glanced at her. "Get me a table," he said, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. "Somewhere visible. I don't do corners." The hostess blinked but kept her composure, leading him to the central table beneath the grand chandelier. He sat down, frowning at the linen like it had offended him. "This is what people are raving about?" he muttered to his assistant. "I've seen better setups at brunch hotels." From behind the bar, Elena watched him with steady eyes. One of the younger servers, Holly, leaned toward her. "That guy's going to be a nightmare," she whispered. Elena gave a soft, dry smile. "Then let's give him the best nightmare he's ever had." She approached his table, her voice warm and even. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Mare. May I bring you a drink to begin?" Bellamy barely looked up. "Took you long enough." I apologize for the wait. Would you prefer sparkling water or perhaps something from our cocktail menu? Neither. Just get me a steak, medium rare, and make it quick, he snapped. Yes, sir, Elena said calmly. Would you like a sauce with that? Did I ask for a sauce? No, sir. Then don't offer one. Elena turned and walked away, her steps measured. At a corner table, Mr. and Mrs. Martin watched silently. She's handling it well, Mrs. Martin said under her breath. Mr. Martin nodded. He has no idea who she is. The ribeye sizzled gently on the ceramic plate as Elena made her way toward the center of the dining room. Her grip was steady, but her heart was quietly racing. The man at table 11 hadn't just been difficult, he had been deliberate, testing her with every interaction. As she reached the table, she set the plate down with care. Thomas Bellamy didn't bother to lift his head. Instead, he kept drumming his manicured fingers against the polished table like a bored king awaiting entertainment. Without making eye contact, he muttered, "Do you even carry premium wine here, or is it just the cheap kind you serve people who don't know any better?" Elena offered a poised smile, not letting her composure slip. "Yes, sir. We have a curated selection. I'll bring the wine menu for you now." As she turned to leave, she heard him scoff under his breath, just loud enough to sting. They should have hired someone who knows her place. Restaurants like this don't need people like her pretending to belong. It was a whisper, but it carried all the weight of an insult meant to cut. Elena didn't stop walking, but a flicker of something sharp flickered across her features. She placed her tray at the bar, took a breath through her nose, and let the rising heat in her chest slowly cool. She had made a choice to step into her server's shoes. And now, she was feeling the full reality of what they endured. Moments later, she returned with the wine list, its cover dark leather with gold lettering. She set it beside Bellamy's plate gently like it was a gift. "Here you go, sir. Take your time. I'd be happy to help you pick something if you like bold or dry reds." He glanced at the menu with mild disinterest and began flipping pages, carelessly. "This selection is barely acceptable," he muttered. "Bring your most expensive red. Just make sure it's drinkable. I've already been disappointed enough this evening." Elena nodded. "Of course. I'll bring it out shortly." She turned again, walking back to the counter where Holly was nervously arranging glasses. "He's still at it?" Holly whispered. Elena nodded. "Just stay focused. We rise above." But as the evening unfolded, the situation grew worse. Mr. Bellamy, it seemed, was determined to test the patience of every soul in the room. First, it was the lighting. "Too dim," he declared, snapping his fingers and motioning for a change. Then it was the music. "Miserable background noise," he called it. His comments grew louder, drawing glances from nearby diners. His assistant sat beside him, cheeks flushed, trying to shrink into his chair. He picked at his steak, scoffing as he cut into it. "This is overcooked," he announced loudly, waving his fork like a wand. "Tell me, is there a single competent person in that kitchen?" Elena stepped forward without missing a beat. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I can have the chef prepare a new one immediately." Bellamy gave a dramatic sigh, tossing his napkin on the table. "No, don't bother. Appetite's ruined now. Bring me the menu again. I'll consider another option, though I doubt it'll be any better." The tension at his table had begun to ripple outward. The Grand Mare was known for its calm and elegance, but now Bellamy's voice cut through the room like a blade. His grumbling, his complaints, his disgust. It was contagious. A couple in the far corner exchanged looks of unease. A woman at the bar paused mid-sip. The energy was shifting. Elena returned with the menu, offering it with both hands. Her movements were graceful, precise. She had learned over the years that restraint was more powerful than reaction. "Mr. Bellamy," she said gently, "the chef is preparing your next dish now. He's ensuring everything meets the highest standards." Bellamy didn't look up. "I didn't ask for perfection," he snapped. I asked for a steak and fast service. If your kitchen can't handle that, maybe you're all in the wrong business." She paused for only a heartbeat. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she replied, voice calm as ever. "I'll check in again shortly." She turned and walked away. At a nearby table, Holly whispered to a fellow server, "I don't know how she does it. I'd be crying by now." In another corner, Mrs. Martin, one of Elena's oldest customers, leaned toward her husband. "She's brilliant," Mrs. said quietly, "but no one should have to deal with that." Mr. Martin nodded slowly, eyes narrowed toward Bellamy. "He's going to push too far." Back at his table, Bellamy continued his performance. He leaned back, let out an exaggerated sigh, and raised his hand high in the air, snapping twice. The sound cracked like a whip through the room. Elena returned, keeping her steps even, her posture straight. "Yes, Mr. Bellamy." He frowned. "Are you planning to serve the rest of my food sometime this century, or should I just cancel everything and leave?" "Your order is almost ready, sir," Elena replied gently. "I appreciate your patience while we finalize it for you." "Don't appreciate me," he said with a sneer. "Just do your job." For the first time that evening, a subtle hush settled over the entire room. Guests were no longer pretending not to listen. They were watching. Bellamy waved again, his gestures now theatrical. Elena approached for the third time in 5 minutes. "Is something wrong, sir?" He laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "The problem," he said, raising his voice, "is that I walked into this place expecting a fine dining experience. Instead, I get delays, sloppy service, and a waitress who acts like she owns the place." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You know what the real issue is?" he continued, scanning the crowd like he wanted everyone to hear. "It's people like you." Elena stood still. "People like you," he said again, leaning in, his eyes narrowing, "who pretend to belong in spaces built for better things. You should stick to what you know, because this isn't it." The silence that followed was thunderous. The hum of voices, the clinking of cutlery, all of it had stopped. From behind the counter, Holly froze, a tray of water glasses trembling in her grip. At the corner table, Mrs. Martin looked physically ill. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He really said it." Even Bellamy's assistant shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the plate and the door. Elena remained composed. Her fingers rested lightly against her apron. Her shoulders stayed tall. She took one steady breath and replied, her voice a quiet thunder. "I'm sorry to hear that you feel this way, sir. We strive to treat every guest with dignity. I'd be happy to address any issue you have with the food or service." Bellamy laughed again. "Dignity?" he mocked. "Don't talk to me about dignity. You lost that the second you brought me a cold steak and expected me to thank you." He waved his hand dismissively. "Just bring someone else. Someone who knows how to speak properly." Elena didn't move. She didn't flinch. Instead, she said, "I'm afraid I'll be your server for the remainder of your meal. If that's not acceptable, I can bring the manager to discuss your options." He blinked. "You?" he said, almost laughing. "You think you can threaten me with policy?" Her tone remained even. "No, sir. Just reminding you of the standard we hold here, for staff and guests alike." The room remained silent. Everyone was waiting. Bellamy leaned back, sneering. "Places like this don't last when the wrong kind of people run them." And still, Elena did not move. A cold hush settled over the restaurant. Mrs. Martin, seated beside her husband, leaned in close. Her voice was a tight whisper. "This is unbearable. Why isn't anyone doing anything?" At the center of the dining hall, Elena stood with the calm of a mountain. She faced Thomas Bellamy, whose eyes glinted with arrogance, his lips curled into a sneer that matched the slow rise of his temper. Elena didn't blink. "We take pride in treating all our guests with the utmost respect," she said. Some just make that a little harder. Her voice was measured, her tone unwavering, but there was something in it, a quiet edge, sharpened, like steel left too long in fire, not anger, not defiance, conviction. Bellamy's eyes narrowed as if sensing her strength and hating it. "Oh," he said, leaning forward across the table, his voice sharp like broken glass. "So now you have an attitude." He scoffed. "Let me be clear, Miss Waitress. You act like you run this place, but you don't. You're just a server, a plate carrier, a napkin folder. You exist to cater to people like me. You are nothing more than what that apron says you are." Elena's lips moved slightly, just enough to form the faintest smile. Not joy, not even sarcasm, just a shadow of something unreadable. She glanced, for only a moment, toward the frosted, glass office door behind the kitchen. Then her gaze returned to him. "Thank you for the feedback, sir," she said, her tone as smooth as silk. "I'll make sure your concerns are heard." Bellamy blinked. He had expected an argument, an apology, even tears. But not this. Not her silence, not her grace. His face twitched as he leaned back in his chair, now visibly flustered. "You'd better," he muttered, stabbing a chunk of bread with unnecessary force. At the bar, Holly rushed to Elena's side, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena," she said, using the fake name their team knew, "why are you letting him talk to you like that? He's out of line." Elena placed a gentle hand on Holly's wrist, her eyes calm. "Patience," she said quietly. "Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer." Holly frowned, chewing on her lip as she stole a glance at Bellamy. "I don't know how you're still standing. I'd have walked out already." "You see," Elena replied softly, "this isn't about him. It's about the moment, knowing when to hold your ground and when to rise." Back at her table, Mrs. Martin shook her head. "This is going too far, Mark," she whispered. "We have to say something. She can't keep taking this." Mark Martin looked torn, his jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold. "Elena knows what she's doing," he said finally. "But, yeah, this is getting dangerous." Bellamy sat chewing, face twisted into a self-satisfied grin. He was oblivious to the stares, or maybe he welcomed them. He looked around the room with an air of royalty. To him, attention was applause, and his cruelty, a performance. "She's walking around like she owns the place," he muttered to his assistant. "Just a server, nothing more." But he wasn't finished. Not even close. When his next order arrived, carried once again by Elena, still composed, still gracious, he waited until she leaned forward to set the plate before him. Her foot, unnoticed, brushed lightly against his. The briefest touch, a blink. His shoe had been sticking, out from under the table, tilted at an awkward angle. Anyone could have missed it. But Bellamy reacted as if struck. He shot up from his chair, the legs screeching against the marble floor. The dining room froze again. "What in the world is wrong with you?" he bellowed, towering over her. "Are you blind, or just incompetent?" Elena stood upright in one fluid motion, her eyes meeting his squarely. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, voice still steady. "It was an accident." "An accident?" he repeated, spitting the word, like poison. No. This is why people like you shouldn't be allowed to work in places like this. You're clumsy, you're careless, and you're not fit to serve real customers." A ripple of tension spread like a dropped stone across a still lake. The diners nearby had stopped eating. Some stared in disbelief. Others looked away, ashamed they hadn't stepped in sooner. Elena remained still. Her hands gripped the silver tray tightly, but her voice was calm. "I didn't see your foot there, sir. I truly apologize." But Bellamy wasn't interested in civility. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" he hissed. "More than what you make in a month? That scuff? You couldn't afford to touch that shoe in your wildest dreams." His words burned through, the air like acid. Still, Elena didn't move. Still, she stood. The jazz music in the background fluttered like a distant memory. The warmth of the restaurant dimmed beneath the weight of humiliation. But Elena's eyes remained clear. Bellamy smirked, cutting into his food as though nothing had happened. He spoke with a fresh sneer. "You know," he said, pausing to chew, "I've been thinking. I don't think a simple apology cuts it. Not this time." Elena tilted her head slightly, brow drawn in quiet confusion. "I've already apologized. Sir, I'd prefer we move forward and make the rest of your evening more enjoyable." He smiled, but it was the smile of someone who enjoyed control far more than comfort. "Oh, I'm not finished," he said, his voice loud now, inviting attention. "That mark on my shoe, you caused it. You should clean it, properly." Elena's smile faded, just a flicker. "I can send someone over to assist you with that," she said. "But I won't be doing that myself." Bellamy's grin widened. He leaned closer. "Not with your hands," he whispered coldly. "With your uniform. Wipe it clean. On your knees. Show some respect to the people who work hard enough to afford to eat here. Unlike you." A gasp came from the bar. Holly's hand flew to her mouth. Across the room, Mrs. Martin clutched her husband's hand, face pale. "This has gone too far," she said through clenched teeth. But like many others, she remained seated, caught in the paralysis of witnessing cruelty in real time. At the center of it all, Elena stood motionless, her fists clenched at her sides. Her chest rose and fell slowly, evenly. Her professionalism waged war with her pride. Then she spoke, her voice measured, but no longer soft. "Sir," she began, "I'm here to accommodate the needs of every guest, but I will not humiliate myself for anyone." Bellamy's smirk dropped. He pointed a finger in her face. "You're already beneath me," he growled. "You don't get a say. Either you wipe it now, or I'll make sure every important name in this city hears about how poorly I was treated. You think a place like this can survive bad press?" He stepped closer. "You want to keep your job? Then do what you're told, or I'll ruin this restaurant. And you with it." The room held its breath. Elena stood rooted to the floor, her face unreadable, her soaked uniform clinging to her skin. The water dripped slowly from her chin onto the marble, the soft patter, deafening in the hush that followed. Around her, diners stared in stunned silence, some horrified, others frozen by the sheer disbelief of what they'd witnessed. Holly stood at the edge of the bar, fists clenched at her sides, her voice trembling with rage. "Elena," she whispered, fiercely. "Don't do this. You don't have to bow to him. He doesn't deserve even your silence." From across the room, Mrs. Martin sat forward, her voice firmer than it had been all evening. "He's trying to degrade you," she said. "Don't give him the satisfaction." But Elena raised a hand, quieting them both. Her eyes, calm and steady, turned toward the man seated smugly before her. "This isn't about him," she said softly. "It's about peace and timing." She turned to Bellamy, her posture composed, her face still. "I don't agree with what you're demanding," she said, "but I'll do this, not because I accept it, but because I won't allow this moment to turn into something it doesn't need to be." And then, with a grace that made the moment feel surreal, Elena slowly knelt down. She lifted the edge of her apron, clean and crisp just minutes before, and with precise, deliberate movements, wiped the imaginary dust from the tip of Thomas Bellamy's expensive shoe. A gasp swept through the restaurant like a gust of wind. Holly's hand flew to her mouth. Holly's eyes welled with tears. Mrs. looked away, unable to bear the image. Mark Martin's hand tightened around his fork. "This is disgusting," he muttered under his breath. Elena rose slowly, her expression unreadable. Bellamy leaned back in his chair, lips curled into a grotesque smirk. "Good," he said with a chuckle. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before acting like you're more than what you are." Just as she turned to walk away, Bellamy reached for the glass water bottle on the table. He unscrewed the cap slowly, with the smugness of a man enjoying a final act of control. And then he flung the water in her face. The splash echoed across the restaurant like a slap. Gasps rang out. Several diners stood up. A knife clattered to the floor. The water soaked her again. Her hair, her chest, her apron now sticking to her like armor torn from battle. Holly took a step forward, fury etched across every line of her face. "That's enough!" she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of her anger. But Elena raised her hand once more, calm, steady, unwavering. Bellamy leaned back, arms folded, pride radiating off him. "That," he said, "was to remind you where you belong. You're not like us. You're not my kind. You're nothing. Just be thankful you get to serve people who matter." The silence that followed was unbearable. Elena stood still. Then, slowly, she raised a corner of her soaked apron and wiped the water from her face. She did not scream. She did not cry. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her back straight, her head high, like a queen retreating from a battlefield, not in defeat, but in preparation. Every eye in the room followed her. Behind the kitchen doors, Holly stormed in after her. "You shouldn't have let him do that," she cried. "You shouldn't have gone down on your knees. You shouldn't have taken that. He had no right." Elena looked at her, her voice low and resolute. "Sometimes, Holly, it's not about what we want to do in the moment. It's about what the moment demands." Holly shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. "But how can you stay so calm?" Elena exhaled slowly. "Because this isn't the end of the story." In the dining room, Thomas Bellamy wiped his mouth with a pristine linen napkin, then signaled to a passing server. "You," he said, "bring me the owner. I have a business proposal, something important." The server hesitated. "Sir, I said I want to speak to the owner. I have a potential partnership opportunity." The server nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll let the owner know." Bellamy leaned back in his chair and turned toward the diners nearby, his voice loud and pompous. "You know," he announced, "I run a network of high-end hotels, the best on the coast. I'm looking for a restaurant like this, something elegant, something sophisticated, for my guests. I could bring a lot of business here. Whoever owns this place, well, they're lucky to be getting my attention." At the corner table, Mrs. Martin let out a slow, deliberate breath. "He really doesn't know," she murmured to her husband. Mark smiled grimly. "Not yet." In the kitchen, a knock came at the door. The young server stepped inside, nervous. "Miss Monroe?" he began, eyes darting. Elena turned, now wiping her hands with a towel. "Thomas Bellamy is asking for the owner. He said, hesitating. "He says he has a proposal." Elena met Holly's gaze. The younger woman's eyes were wide. "Are you really going to see him after all that?" Elena nodded once. "Yes," she said, "because it's time." She stepped into the staff locker room, removed her wet apron, and changed into a tailored navy suit that hugged her frame like it was cut from her confidence. Her earrings glinted beneath the soft lights. She pinned back her damp hair, applied a touch of lipstick, and took one long, steadying breath. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She stepped into the dining room, and the transformation was instant. The chatter dimmed. Glasses paused mid-air, heads turned. Every person in the room recognized what they were seeing. This wasn't the waitress. This was the woman in charge. She walked with intention, her heels tapping like punctuation against the floor. When she stopped at Bellamy's table, he looked up, mildly annoyed. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "I asked for the owner, not another server." Elena tilted her head ever so slightly. Her voice was smooth, calm, and commanding. "You're speaking to her." Bellamy blinked. "What?" "I'm Elena Monroe," she said, placing a sleek folder on the table in front of him. "Founder, owner, CEO, and the very woman you've spent the last hour belittling." She opened the folder. Inside were articles about the restaurant's success, financial records, business profiles, all bearing her name. Thomas Bellamy sat frozen, his eyes locked on the folder that now lay open before him. Inside, page after page of official documents stared back. Business licenses, ownership contracts, feature articles from food journals, and even a Forbes interview titled "The Vision Behind the Grand Mayor, Elena Monroe Journey from Server to CEO." All of them carried the same signature. Her signature. "You're the owner," he stammered, his voice hoarse, barely rising above a whisper. Elena stood tall beside the table, her presence now undeniable. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'm Elena Monroe, owner and CEO of this restaurant, the very woman you've been demeaning since you walked through those doors." Around the room, murmurs rose like the beginning of a storm. Some diners gasped, others exchanged shocked glances. A few began to clap softly, as if finally understanding the weight of what they had just witnessed. At the back of the room, Mrs. Martin smiled, nudging her husband. "I told you," she whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Near the counter, Holly's face lit up with pride. Her frustration had vanished, replaced by something stronger, admiration. Her chest swelled with a sense of justice so long overdue it felt like sunlight breaking after a storm. Bellamy's shoulders drooped as he sank deeper into his chair. His face had lost all color, and his confident smirk had crumbled into something brittle and desperate. He cleared his throat. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice shaky, eyes darting nervously to the onlookers. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. My behavior, it was unacceptable, out of line. But now that we've cleared the air, perhaps we can move past this. I truly believe we'd make a great team. I've got a proposal." Elena raised a hand. "There's nothing to discuss," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "Because the way you treated me speaks louder than any proposal ever could." Bellamy opened his mouth to respond, but Elena didn't give him the chance. "This place wasn't built on wealth or ego," she continued. "It was built on dignity, respect, humanity, values you clearly have no interest in." Her tone was not angry, it was resolute. "Any business that fails to honor those values," she said, "has no future here." The silence returned, but this time it was electric. Then Mrs. began clapping. One slow, deliberate clap, then another and another. Mark joined in, then Holly, then the entire room. Applause erupted like thunder across the floor. Elena didn't move. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that mattered. Later that evening, long after the last table had been cleared, Elena sat in her office, finally alone. Outside the glass wall behind her, she watched her team laugh and sweep and polish, still buzzing from what had happened. The Grand Mayor was alive again, not just a restaurant, but a movement. Her phone buzzed beside her. Notifications flooded. The screen. Clips from the confrontation had gone viral. Dozens of angles from phone cameras, snippets of her speech, the moment she revealed who she was. Comments poured in by the thousands. Posts flooded social media with hashtags like "serve with respect" and "Elena Monroe story." A local news station had already called to schedule an interview. But what mattered most weren't the headlines. It was the feeling, the stillness in her heart, that calm resolve that only comes from knowing you did the right thing. The next morning, Elena sat for a heartfelt interview with a local journalist. "People think leadership is about being loud," she said, "but real strength is quiet. It's found in how we treat people when no one's watching. Respect isn't earned by money or titles. It's shown in every interaction, with guests, with staff, with strangers." She paused, then smiled gently. "You don't build a great restaurant by serving food. You build it by serving dignity." In the days that followed, the story of the Grand Mayor spread beyond the city. But Thomas Bellamy's reputation took a different path. His name trended online, but not for the reasons he wanted. His behavior was condemned across business circles. Deals fell through. Clients backed out. Several board members of his company released statements distancing themselves. And suddenly, the man who claimed to make or break businesses found himself standing on shaky ground. Meanwhile, Elena sat in her office, quietly sipping coffee as she overlooked her team from above. The hum of conversation below was joyful. The energy on the floor had changed. Staff moved with pride, shoulders square, steps sure. Diners smiled wider. The room felt lighter. That evening, Elena gathered her staff. They stood in a semicircle, quiet but beaming. "I want you all to hear something," she said. "This isn't just a restaurant. This is a safe space. A space built on values. We don't tolerate disrespect, not toward you, not from anyone." She looked around the circle, locking eyes with each member. "You're not just workers," she continued. "You're the soul of this place. Thank you for standing strong, for believing in what we're building together." They clapped, some of them with tears in their eyes. Holly hugged her tightly afterward. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," Holly whispered. "You stood up for all of us." Weeks passed. And then, one quiet afternoon, the glass doors opened. In walked a man who looked familiar, yet entirely different. Thomas Bellamy. Gone was the confident gait. Gone was the smug expression. His shoulders were slightly hunched. His hands were in his coat pockets. His eyes held no trace of superiority, only hesitation. Elena, now seated behind the front counter beside the host, looked up as he approached. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice soft, humbled. "I came to apologize." She raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. "I've spent the last few weeks doing some real thinking," he said. "What I said to you, what I said about you, it was wrong, cruel, and it wasn't just that day. It was a pattern. I've treated people poorly for a long time. I see that now." Elena didn't speak, allowing the silence to stretch. He continued. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly." The restaurant had quieted slightly. Staff and a few diners subtly turned to watch. After a pause, Elena replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I appreciate your apology," she said. "Acknowledging the harm is the first step, and it's a good one." Bellamy nodded, looking down at his shoes. "I don't expect anything," he added. "Just thank you for hearing me out." Elena took a deep breath. "I believe in growth," she said, "but I also believe in boundaries. While I accept your apology, I have to be honest. We won't be doing business together. The values of this place must be protected. Always." He nodded again, quietly. "I understand." And with that, he turned and left. Months passed. The Grand Mayor continued to thrive. The story of its owner spread across media as a symbol of grace under fire. People from around the country came not just for the food, but for the example. Elena introduced new staff trainings focused on handling discrimination, conflict resolution, and guest communication. A new sign was placed at the front entrance. Everyone is welcome here, but respect is the dress code. One night, as the restaurant buzzed with life, Holly leaned over the counter smiling. "You don't just run a restaurant," she told Elena. "You lead a revolution." Elena chuckled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Not a revolution," she said. "Just a reminder that kindness and courage still matter." As the evening wound down, Elena stood by the large windows at the front of the restaurant, watching her team. She saw laughter at table 12, a surprise proposal at table 6, a couple at the bar sharing a quiet toast, and Holly, confident, poised, helping a guest with ease. Elena closed her eyes for a moment and took a breath. This wasn't just a victory. It was the start of something even bigger. And as she stepped onto the floor, arms open to embrace her staff, she knew respect had won. And it always would. True leadership isn't loud. It stands tall in silence. It doesn't flex power. It uplifts dignity. Elena Monroe reminded us all that respect isn't tied to titles or wealth. It's shown in how we treat others, especially when no one is watching. Kindness is strength. Courage is grace. And standing up for what's right, even quietly, can change everything. If you believe in dignity, justice, and the power of quiet strength, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that uplift and inspire. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder. Respect is always in style.